afternoon. I'm Eric Erickson. These are the four things you need to know this afternoon. The stories breaking while you were working that the mainstream media would rather you absorb without thinking, but not here. We're going to stop, reflect, and analyze. So let's dig in first with Iran escalating as the president shifts his strategy. Iran has announced it's scaling up its nuclear enrichment activities after a censure vote from the International Atomic Energy Agency. That's not just rhetoric. Tehran says it will begin installing hundreds of advanced centrifuges at a key underground site. And while the former Biden administration tried to deflect, President Trump is leaning in with a strategic pivot that could reshape the U.S.-Israel alliance. Let's start with Iran. For years now, they've played a game of nuclear brinksmanship. Stall, enrich uranium, stall again. And time after time, the West has caved, believing negotiation was better than confrontation. That strategy is running out of steam. The IAEA censure is a rare move driven by Iran's refusal to cooperate with investigators or explain traces of enriched uranium found at undeclared sites. In other words, Iran isn't just hiding its nuclear work, it's daring the world to stop it. Now comes Donald Trump, who is reportedly encouraging Israeli restraint against a direct strike on Iran. At first glance, that might sound surprising. This is the same president who ordered the killing of Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general responsible for American deaths. But it's important to understand that Trump is doing something that Biden didn't do. The former president's approach was all carrot, no stick, trying to re-enter the failed nuclear Iran deal while watching Iran cozy up to Russia and China. Meanwhile, President Trump appears to be building a broader coalition, leveraging the Abraham Accords and seeking a diplomatic win that preserves regional stability and keeps Iran in check without provoking a full-scale war. His strategic triangulation. It underscores how different foreign policy is between the Biden administration and the Trump administration. And, by the way, Donald Trump is making clear, if he can't get resolution, he will allow Israel to respond, and says an Israeli response is getting closer and closer, understanding the reality of what would happen if Iran gets a nuclear bomb. Well, the migrant crisis continues, and the president is taking action on the Parole program. CNN is reporting the Trump administration has begun sending notices to immigrants from Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Haiti. Their parole has ended. Under President Biden, the government established a parole program for those fleeing social unrest from those four countries. The immigrants were allowed into the United States and then given work permits. No more, says President Trump, sending emails to the email addresses on file given by the parole immigrants to Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security notice states, quote, "This notice informs you that your parole is now terminated. If you do not leave, you may be subject to enforcement actions, including but not limited to detention and removal, without an opportunity to make personal arrangements or return to your country in an orderly manner," end quote. The Biden administration inarguably was too lenient with their parole program. Just last week, the United States Supreme Court notified the Trump administration it was perfectly reasonable for the Trump administration to undo the program without judicial interference and ruled they could begin deportations. The Trump administration is acting quickly to make it happen. According to Tricia McLaughlin to CNN, quote, "Ending the CHNV parole programs, as well as the paroles of those who exploited it, will be necessary and a return to common sense policies, a return to public safety, and a return to America first." That again, Homeland Security Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin to CNN in a statement. The program impacted 530,000 people roughly. There's no word yet on how many of those people will have their parole revoked. Well, Donald Trump is taking a step against California in the electric vehicle program. We go to California, where the state has tried to use its clout, and the environmental left has tried to use its clout, well, stop environmental progress in the name of environmental progress. That sounds confusing. It kind of is. At the center of the showdown is California's attempt to gain a waiver under the Clean Air Act that lets states set their own emission standards that are stricter than the federal government, advancing environmental regulations to advance environmental standards that actually wind up harming the environment. The former Biden administration granted the waiver. Donald Trump has now signed congressional legislation to revoke it, saying that now a court can't stop it. To understand the stakes, understand the legal foundation. The Clean Air Act was never meant to let one state dictate environmental policy for the entire country. California has used its size in both population and car sales to strong-arm automakers into adopting its green agenda, even if it's not the best green agenda. Under the Biden administration, the agenda would be nationalized without a vote of Congress because of California's clout. President Trump, acting with Senate and House Republicans, has said enough, now revoking the waiver under federal legislation that California won't be able to get back. It's a necessary course correction, especially as electric vehicle mandates increasingly ignore both economic realities and environmental fallout. They're not as environmentally friendly as we've said or claimed. We're seeing what happens when ideology trumps infrastructure. EVs are expensive, charging networks are inconsistent, the grid isn't ready, yet California has insisted its one-size-fits-all solution for the country is a good. It's not. And let's be blunt. This isn't just about cars. It's about federalism, constitutional limits within federalism, and the idea that no state gets to act like a sovereign nation using its clout to dictate the terms for every other state. President Trump's stance and Congress's action as a defense of common sense, consumer choice, and constitutional order is exactly the kind of policy clarity that's been missing in Washington since the last time he was there. Finally, we move to Pete Hegseth, raising eyebrows in Washington, D.C. The Secretary of Defense testified before the Congressional House Armed Services Committee today and was asked repeatedly by Congressman Ro Khanna of California, a very progressive member, if he would honor court orders related to the Marines' involvement in the riots in Los Angeles. Pete Hegseth chose his words carefully, saying, quote, "What I can say is we should not have local judges determining foreign policy or national security policy for the country." Pressed again, Hegseth again insisted the courts should not be involved and would not answer yes or no to the question. Democrats have seized on this to yet again claim the Trump administration is pursuing a constitutional crisis. But the broad authority of the president to send the troops to quell violence as long as they're not engaged in law enforcement operations is pretty well settled constitutionally. Democrats are instead using these sorts of questions to fan the flames of discord and rally progressives and incite more people to riot. If anything, it's the left provoking a constitutional crisis, not the Secretary of Defense or the president. These four stories, from Tehran centrifuges to the Los Angeles riots, share something in common. They reveal a tension between strength and softness, between clarity and confusion. Iran tests our resolve, migrants test our border, California tests the Constitution. The left continues to test the limits of what it means to be American and let America preserve the rule of law. The answer for conservatives is, well, don't riot, don't retreat, reclaim what's ours. We don't need new values. We need to reassert the ones that build the country: accountability, liberty, limited government, and a belief in the dignity of hard-earned freedom. That's what we aim to do here every afternoon. Thanks for joining me for the 4 Things to Know this afternoon. Until next time, I'm Eric Erickson. Stay informed, stay principled, and please, above all else, keep the faith.